Imagine you are an artist in the early 2000s. The way to break into the masses involves knowing the right person and being lucky enough to get in a room with the right people. You have to get a hold of the radio stations, go in and meet with the on-air personalities, and hope that they play your song. Keep in mind, hundreds of other artists are trying to get their foot in the door, literally at these radio stations and in the rooms with the right teams as well. On top of that, you have to hope that you're lucky enough to be born in or live in one of the top 10 music market countries. You have to hope that you were charismatic enough to win over the gatekeepers, who are meeting with dozens of people just like you every day. On top of all this, the rise of websites like Napster during this time could also mean that any attention you do garner online could be lost to piracy. But now that is changing thanks to industry pioneer Spotify, and the globalization and democratization of music is at an all-time high. Today, we are lucky enough to speak to Bryan Johnson, Spotify's head of artist and industry partnerships.
Hey, Nicky. Hey, Coco. I'm in London. I'm here to answer your questions. Let's go.
We will be discussing how artists get paid from the money they generate on Spotify, how Spotify has helped monetize and increase exposure to artists that may not have been seen in the old structure, and what new and emerging artists can do to maintain an active and growing listenership on the app. Hi, I'm Coco.
Hi, I'm Nicky.
And this is Share Your Screen.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is going to be a bonus episode for you all. We are super excited about this episode. Our last Spotify episode that we did was probably the most ever DMs that we've gotten.
Just by far.
People really excited about knowing what tools there are to grow if you're an artist. And so we went back to Spotify to do another interview with another exec there, Bryan Johnson. And we had such a great conversation that the internet may never see because by no fault of anyone, the files were corrupted. But we really wanted to get this episode out. So we were like, let's do it again. Mm-hmm. And so we talked to Bryan. We're going to be having clips from him inserted into this episode so you guys can get a complete feel for it. And thank you so much. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe because we've been growing and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm so excited for this episode. I think it was really cool to see the differences between these two. How Selena, the first person we interviewed, worked a lot more in the editorial music side. So a lot more to do with playlisting and getting your music discovered in Spotify. Whereas I think a lot of the stuff with Bryan, what's really interesting is his has a lot to do with how artists are making money on Spotify, which is super interesting to hear. A stat you said, $4.5 billion to independent artists is the most amount of money that's ever been paid. And also, I believe the stat from this year was that they paid out $9 billion, which is the largest any single company has ever paid to the music industry in history. And to see how much music has expanded, exactly what you're saying, how independent music's at an all-time high, how globalization of music is at an all-time high, how this ability to self-publish has made all of these things easier and remove these gatekeepers, exactly as you said, is really cool to see, I think, the state of music. Mm-hmm. And I think it's no coincidence that we're also getting, it feels, I don't know, at least to me, it feels like in the past year we've gotten more new artists than I can remember in years.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I feel like with Spotify too, to your point, something that really stood out to me in our initial conversation with Bryan was that for the first time ever, there's this catalog of music that people didn't have access to. And the way that artists made money in the past was you had to hope that the week that your CD came out, people ran to the store and bought physical copies. And for the first time ever too, not only are new artists getting this new spotlight, but artists that had these big catalogs have people now going back and listening in a way that they wouldn't have because a radio station wouldn't have played it. And maybe they wouldn't have thought to walk into, a CVS and get a CD if it was even available.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of Kate Bush. Did you know that Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill became the #1 song in the world 39 years after it was released? She was 65 when she got her first ever #1 song. And it's like we always say, it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. This power of streaming has made it so something like a Stranger Things, a show that exists decades after its release, can popularize something and an entirely new generation of people can go in and discover it. It's not just this cross globalization of music in terms of country, but also we're seeing this like cross generational, like my mom knows that song.
Yeah.
Or even like Murder on the Dance Floor by Sophie Ellis Bextor, I think was another great example from Saltburn, where like that song came out in 2001. I was born in 1999. I was 2. I don't remember it. It was my first time ever hearing it. And I think it's also cool to see how like one piece of media can impact another, how, like a movie impacts a song, how a TV show impacts a song, is cool. And all of that has to do with streaming, like none of that. Netflix wasn't existing 20 years ago either. So I don't know. It's really beautiful to see how music continues to grow in ways I don't think anybody is really predicting.
Yeah, like there's no way to, when Kate Bush was making that song, she wasn't like, there's this app that's going to come around called Spotify and Netflix and like TikTok's
and Millie Bobby Brown, who was not even born.
Even born. Yeah, exactly. And another thing about Sophie Ellis Bextor and Murder on the Dance Floor is I have a Coachella prediction, and it's very, very specific.
Okay.
I think that Skepta, he's like a UK rapper, and he has this one song called Love Me Not, and he sampled Murder on the Dance Floor years before it became popular again. Yeah, years before. And because he's like a UK kind of grime rapper, Sophie Ellis Bextor was even asked about it when the song came out, and they're like, do you like the sample? Like, it's such a different vibe. And she was like, yeah, I love the song. I wouldn't have approved it if I didn't like it.
Yeah.
So you have this sample in Skepta's song, and then at the end, it's the Murder on the Dance Floor fully just playing. Since Skepta is going to be at Coachella, mark my words, I think that he is going to bring out Sophie Ellis Bextor.
I could see that.
It would be like when Zendaya got brought out with Labyrinth. Like,
that's exactly what I was going to say. Is like Coachella is really known for these unconventional pairings and these like unconventional surprise performances. Like I even think of like the Tupac hologram from like way back. Like it's really known for like trying to do something that nobody could see coming. And that would be such a good one.
I think that would go so viral, and it would also just be this nod again to catalog music, where because of Saltburn and then Spotify Murder on the Dance Floor, like I could be mistaken, but I believe Murder on the Dance Floor was even on like the Pop Rising playlist, 20 years after it came out.
Oh my God. I mean, I literally went to a bar the other weekend and like it was playing multiple times.
Yeah, it's so cool to see like in the past, a song might have been featured in a movie, but the audience might not have been able to, even if they wanted to, go to their local store and have the physical CD still on the shelf.
Right, or you're not going to buy the CD for one song.
Yeah, and it's where streaming services like Spotify come in. And we're going to have Bryan talk about that specific thing as well. But right now, just so you guys have context, I'm going to have Bryan tell us a little about him and his background.
I am Bryan Johnson. I'm head of artist and industry partnerships here at Spotify, and I'm at Spotify right now in our London office. I'm also a musician, and I actually began my career as a full-time artist, making records, releasing records, touring both in a band and as a session musician. I then pivoted more towards the industry side around 15 years ago, and I've been at Spotify for almost 11 years now.
In 2023, Spotify paid $9 billion to artists and their rights holders. What is the biggest difference between how artists monetize their music 10 years ago versus now? And what tools has Spotify given to artists and their teams to help monetize their music and audiences?
So in 2023, Spotify set the record for the highest annual payment to the music industry from any single retailer. And that figure was $9 billion US. Huge, huge figure. What does that actually mean though? Let's break it down. Well, for the first year ever, half of that revenue was accounted for by independent artists and labels. This is the first, and this is huge. And it's another indicator of the massive shift that the industry has seen as a result of streaming and Spotify being a big part of the streaming economy. It's a far cry from where we were 10 years ago when the industry was at rock bottom. If you think about 2014 when the industry really bottomed out, the cost of creating, the cost of producing, and the cost of releasing music has become way more affordable. So independent artists can now access the same global audience and resources as those superstars. And Spotify for Artists plays a a considerable role here. We play a key role here. I think the best way to see Spotify for artists is it's like a multi-purpose tool or like a Swiss Army knife with many, many functions. You can take creative control over your profile and tap into the expression tools, the creative expression tools like Canvas and Clips, as well as, of course, updating imagery on your artist page. You can put tracks forward for playlist consideration through the playlist pitch form. You can drive new and existing fans to listen to your music, to engage with your music through audience development tools and marketing tools such as Showcase, Marquee, Discovery Mode, and very importantly, you can actually monitor the impact of that work you're doing by driving people in within the music and audience tabs in the analytics portal in Spotify for Artists. There you can deep dive into levels of engagement and monitor the performance of the songs.
And what's really interested me about this like rise of streaming and just the way, I guess we've seen like physical music really decrease, is how music has no longer become like a transaction economy and is really more skewed towards this like passive revenue economy, right? In the past, you think of ways an artist makes money is CD/album sales, it's tour tickets, and it's merch. So these are like three very transaction-based, like you can only sell tour tickets when you're on tour. You're only going to sell the majority of merch at the tour. You're only going to sell the most CDs in the first 1 to 2 months, and then people aren't going to buy it after that. And the beauty of music now is that it's become passive. Like artists can make money in their sleep in ways that was not even possible, or they can release something and it not take off for 6 months or years, and over time, again, through this passive structure, it can gain attention and gain traction years and years later. And I think that's a really important thing to think about too, as artists, you know, are able to diversify their revenue. I mean, I even think like the social media boom, arguably, as like artists are kind of creators in a way too, you know? And it's really cool to see how not just the way we discover music has evolved, but also like the business of these creators of music has evolved as well.
Yeah, I love that. And it also kind of leads to what we were talking about with Bryan, and which you guys can find on the Loud&Clear report, which is that over 25% of artists who generated more than $10,000 on Spotify in 2022 published independently through apps like DistroKid and TuneCore. To you, Nicky.
Okay.
Why do you think now is the best time to be an independent artist, and what factors do you think have even happened in the last couple months that change the way that we find music?
I mean, there's so many. One, independent artists have never made more money than they did this past year. Spotify paid $4.5 billion to independent artists. Also, that made up 50% of the entire money that they paid out in a year, which is the first time independent artists and indie labels have been the equal to the big three music labels. So I think just in terms of a financial perspective, we're definitely seeing this shift towards independent music. Number two, I think we've seen how this UMG and TikTok debacle has really made it easier for artists to be discovered. If you think about like the For You page right now, mine is like Dasha, Austin by Dasha. It's Benson Boone. It's DJO. All of these people are independent artists. And I think I even saw a Billboard article that talked about how 20 of the current top 50 songs in the world are by independent artists.
Wow.
And I was like, that is like really like this sign of how, one, social media being this great equalizer, right? Yeah. Like this ability for discovery is no longer gatekept by a radio station. It's self-publishing. And on top of that, I remember I in this Billboard article too, they talked about how this year, over 50% of the people nominated for Grammys were independent artists. And we saw multiple independent artists win, like LeVay, independent artist, Killer Mike, independent artist. And Steve Lacy, I believe, won a Grammy when he's independent. Like, we're seeing actually not even just like discovery or monetization, but like getting to the level of winning a Grammy as an independent artist is possible. And I think also the more that it happens, the more that these sort of blueprints and stuff get kind of set out there. You can look at the career of somebody else who's doing it independent and understand how they are achieving that feat. And that didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago. And I think as more and more people do it, there's more and more things to study, like people to look at. But what about you? What is your take?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think The TikTok situation is interesting because prior to that too, we'd already kind of seen independent artists be able to rise due to the TikTok algorithm. And I think we saw the tide shifting again back towards labels where they were the ones that were able to put the money into promoting certain songs, and UMG pulling their massive catalog off of TikTok. And I made a video, I think like the night this happened, where I was like, yes, this is so sad for like the mid to lower level artists at UMG. But I think one of the silver linings is that we're going to see more independent artists take off in 2024 than we've ever seen since maybe SoundCloud. And if you are an independent artist, you can listen to our interview that we did with Selena from Spotify, where she really talks about what you should be writing in your pitch to Spotify. And one of the playlists that you really want to get placed on is one of the Fresh Finds playlists. And also in your pitch, including what I thought was so interesting, what I took away from that interview is include like the time of day and what activity someone would be doing while listening to your song, because that's really one way that they decide playlists, which is so fascinating.
Yeah, because I think there's like so many playlists that they can playlist it in ways you're not even thinking of.
Yeah.
Like a friend of mine, I remember she makes pop music, and she released a song, and they put her on a playlist that was like getting ready for a night out. And I was like, that's such an like a specific, like you're not out yet, but you're like trying to get yourself hype to go out. And I was like, that's one great placement for her and the type of music she makes. And I was like, it's just those type of things. Like it's a specific emotion. It's a specific time of day. It's a specific activity. And I think even just me saying that in your head, you could probably think of a few songs that would fit that vibe. You know what I mean?
Even after our interview, we had some comments and stuff of people being like, thank you for this advice, because it made me rethink the way I even create my music.
Yeah.
Creating music to be like, okay, this is like you're driving on the freeway, like you had a long day at work, but you're like melancholy. So I think that's really fascinating. And yeah, I mean, in terms of streaming, I do want to say that there's more noise now that you have to try and pierce through. And there's many ways that people are able to do that. So don't feel like there's anything wrong with you if it's taking a while. You know, sometimes so much of this is a numbers game, but that it does feel like with streaming, the playing field is a little bit better than back in, you know, even the early 2000s. You had to hope you got on a record label. They had to drive you around to the record stations. You literally had to go and shake hands, kiss babies' foreheads, you know, run for mayor to hope that 3 men in suits at, you know, Kiss FM and Amp Radio would decide that you'd be the one song that they would rotate out of 10. So now there's just more playing field. And to go along with that, I also want to mention that they put in the Loud&Clear report that in 2023, over half of the artists who generated more than 10,000 on Spotify were from countries where English isn't the first language. And I really think that that's a sign of the times in terms of the globalization of music. And it was, you know, the huge charts, and even you could see the award shows like the Grammys, it was so Western focused and English focused. But now you're seeing artists take off who don't have any like English on their, you know, records, or also not just that, but like the top, you know, 10 music markets in the world. There's artists that are coming from smaller countries that are taking off because of streaming, which I think is really cool.
Okay, so this is a favorite takeaway of mine. In 2023, over half of the artists who generated at least $10,000 on Spotify were from countries where English is not the first language. This is a very, very inspiring point. I think it's now established that streaming brought down barriers to entry. We know K-pop is massively on the rise around the world. We see Afrobeats, we see Amapiano traveling and being propelled into the mainstream across various countries and continents. And Latin music is very much a superstar on the world stage. But we are finally now seeing all of that come to fruition, and the numbers have shifted and the money is going in that direction. This was not happening before streaming. It just was not happening before streaming, or even 10 years ago. The industry back then was dominated by artists from a handful of Anglo markets, because maybe that's where the deepest pockets in the industry were headquartered. There's now a growing freedom of choice that fans have access to. We see fans' tastes expanding, we see fans' tastes shifting, and they can much more easily tap into like-minded communities all around the world and access a far broader catalogue than they previously could. The world itself feels more interconnected in that respect, and this year's Loud&Clear data really shows that. We see Spanish, we see German, we see Portuguese, we see French and Korean language countries lead the way, while Hindi, Indonesian, Punjabi, Tamil, Greek all saw huge upticks in 2023 as well.
Totally. And I remember, I actually think I made a video about this. And one of the artists that recently came to mind for me was Tyla. Yeah. And she is an English speaker even, but I was doing research on her and just in general, like the South African music scene, because while it's big and like they have a lot of influence, it's not on this global scale. Like it's not a top 10 global music market. And when I was researching her, I found that she was the first artist from South Africa to get a top 50 globally song on the billboards in 55 years.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, like that, it's interesting from that perspective. I think from just like raw discovery, the fact that that's possible. And then for non-English speaking countries too, I think it's also interesting to see like, from like a taste perspective, we're seeing people willing to consume and actively consuming music they don't understand the lyrics to. Yeah. And I think that is even just from like a raw behavioral standpoint. You know what I mean? Like it would make sense to me if somebody first starts to like K-pop, but then maybe they start to get into Latin music. And then after Latin music, they discover a song in Greek or, you know, like I think that that's like just an interesting behavioral change that is going to continue to ramp itself up too, of just like a user perspective of being like, yeah, I don't need to know the lyrics to the song to like it and enjoy it. And then once I found that I like and enjoy it, I can go and find the lyrics or look them up or learn about the artist or learn about the song. But it's also just this like world, I think, behavioral shift. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I think something Spotify is really good at is this like playlist curation.
Yes.
And to me, there's certain playlists on Spotify that I trust so much. Pop Rising, Lorem, Pollen, and I even now my day list where they could put a song on one of these playlists that I listen to every day that maybe is an artist I've never heard of. Maybe they're not even speaking a language that I speak, but I trust the playlist so much that I'm going to give it a listen and go into it positively and open-minded. And it almost acts in a way as like kind of the For You page on TikTok where you really trust that it's taking thousands and thousands of videos uploaded every minute and showing you the best few that they know you will like. That's how Spotify feels to me in its curation. And I think it's why we see some of these artists developing these fan bases where Spotify's kind of doing the vetting for them and is kind of this like, you know, referral in a way. And to me, I just trust certain playlists so much that I would listen to anything that they put on it.
Referral's such a great word for it.
Yeah.
It's like a trusted friend giving you an advice or like where to eat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like because they have this credibility, you trust them and they do it. Or even from like the Selena episode, I remember I thought one of the most interesting facts was like what she said about Noah Kahan and how he had a primarily male audience until they put him on Pop Rising. And now he has like over a 60% Gen Z female audience.
Wow.
And how they did that just kind of on like a whim. Like they had like tested it in a few pop playlists and it was doing well. And they had just be like, you know what? Like I could see this really appealing to like young women and like Pop Rising and stuff like that. And how much that completely transformed his career. I think it's really cool to see stories like that.
Going back to the, you know, Katie Bush running up that hill and the increase in streams that on Spotify, they call them heritage artists. And it's artists that haven't posted new music in like 5 years, but are getting this streams still passively. So for my question for Bryan is, can you explain why this is harder to accomplish prior to streaming of music and how Spotify has helped spotlight catalogs for artists?
That's a great question, and they're really good examples. So let's take a step back. Pre-streaming, there wasn't the physical shelf space for every artist at record stores. And it's fair to say that you likely needed some sort of record deal to even get your foot through the door. So it was quite difficult as a DIY artist or maybe an independent artist then to get in the door and get your record stocked. Even if you got in the door, only the releases selling in big quantities actually stuck around on the shelves. The rest had to make way for the next week's new releases. Now, in 2024, the shelf space is so much broader And an artist release, whether that's a catalogue track or a brand new track, it's got a moment to shine. And remember, if a listener hears a track for the very first time, and the track's from 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, if they hear that for the first time, it's new music to their ears. Super interesting point on catalogue. We released a fan study report. We have a series of reports as well, side to Loud&Clear, called Fan Study. Definitely worth checking out. We released a fan study report a couple of years ago that looked at catalogue and the impact into streaming and very much the synergy with streaming. One of the findings was that more catalogue tracks than ever are charting on Spotify. And there's a wonderful relationship between landing a sync and the positive knock-on effect you can have into streaming and into Spotify. When you land a sync, we see a huge jump in brand new listeners, not just for that sync track, but for the rest of your work also, for the rest of your catalogue also.
My last question to Bryan was, is there anything else about the Spotify Loud&Clear report that you want to add any additional information or context to that we did not ask you about?
I recommend checking out the Q&A section on Loud&Clear. This is a very detailed corner of the site where we aim to answer the most common questions that we receive. So these questions are things like, what is stream share? What is the per stream rate? How do you calculate per stream rate? And the section gives more background on Loud&Clear and why we launched it in the first place. So do check out the Q&A section. Also, there's some great videos on Loud&Clear that we haven't discussed so far. So there's a video on how royalties flow on the artist side, and there's a video on how royalties flow on the songwriter side as well. So I would recommend checking out those videos as well as the Q&A section.
Anything else that you want to add is to the Loud&Clear report?
No, I mean, honestly, to me, I think the most surprising statistics were really in terms of like payments towards people in music markets, whether that's like independent labels or countries that you did not expect or don't even know of, is even crazy. I think I also read that like they had tracked like what the fastest growing languages were on Spotify for music.
Yeah.
And there was 5 of them. I don't remember all 5, but I know it was Hindi, Indonesian, and Greek.
Wow.
And I was like, that's so cool. Like, it's so interesting to see how, like, our 3 years, are we all going to be listening to like a Greek artist? Is there going to be like a Greek Bad Bunny or an Indonesian or an Indonesian Blackpink or something? Like someone who has this like really big breakthrough into this like Western audience, I think is exciting. As a music fan, it makes me excited. I think the more options there is, the better it is for consumers always.
Yeah. And if you are an independent artist yourself and you're on TikTok, now is the best time to get your music out there, and then maybe it'll get playlisted, make the case for it then getting playlisted on Spotify, because the, huge juggernauts of the music industry have kind of been pushed off the app, and now is like a great time to try and get a viral hit online and then, have that momentum carry over. So that was the, bonus episode that we had for the Loud&Clear report. And we're really, really grateful that we got to do this. And if you guys have any questions that you ever want us to ask Spotify, we'd love to do more episodes with them, and let us know in the comments, and we will make mental notes of all of them.
We will. And thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you. And if we don't have we'll have an episode up by then.
Yeah. Also, I was going to say, if you guys see it at Coachella, say hi.
That's literally Nicky read my mind. I was like, we are going to be at Coachella, hell and high water. Okay, let's just take a second here. I'm so excited because on my vision board 2 years ago, I had high aspirations.
This is a good story.
Very high aspirations. Okay. Some people want to be an astronaut. They want to run for president. My one thing on my vision board was get invited to Neon Carnival at Coachella. And for those of you that are curious, it's basically this carnival that happens on Saturday at Coachella every year. It's not affiliated with Coachella. I believe it's Nylon Magazine. And it goes from after Coachella ends until 2 a.m. And this is where if you're someone, there are paparazzi photos of you walking into Neon Carnival, and Nicky and I got invited. Not sure how. So excited. So I'm so excited. Lana Del Rey and Neon Carnival are the top of my excitement list for Coachella.
Wow, that's a good one.
I can't believe we manifest. We swung it, man.
We swung it. I mean, for me, I'm just like excited for the experience since I've never been.
Oh, you've never,
like,
yeah.
it's just like, I'm like, whoa, like it's so, like I want to see it, and I've seen pictures of it, and you know what I mean? Like, when you just have something that you've seen so much. And Sabrina Carpenter, I think.
Renee Rapp.
Yeah.
Will be there.
I need to see her do that little kick. Sabrina Carpenter do that little kick.
Slam the door.
That's what I'm saying, girl. That is what I'm saying.
Oh my God. Also, I am still a little afraid of Jordan.
He went really silent.
Were you silent or were you silenced? He, I think, deleted the comments and we never heard from him again. So Jordan, if you're out there, again, this is our olive branch to you, and we don't want to have a miserable Coachella by any means necessary. We love that you're that passionate about Coachella.
And we like that you take your job seriously.
Yes, and we are there to have fun with you. So please do not make our Coachella experience miserable, please. And if you see us, say hi. I already got some DMs from people being like, "Are you going to Coachella?"
Love that.
Yeah, so if you see us, say hi. We are so excited to meet some of you guys. Imagine like no one recognizes.
That's okay.
I mean, that's okay.
That's okay.
And we're still gonna have fun because we're there for the music. But anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and continue the conversation in the comments and the Discord. And we'll see you next time for Lana Del Rey Part 1.
Get ready for it. Bye.
Bye.